So
I might like edit the
Okay,
audio,
guys.
so like it gets rid of
what is our give a list of?
Someone have like a list of questions. You want, yeah.
I've got a few.
Do you want to like read them out?
Should
we can initiate.
address what the
Yeah, should we address?
outcome is,
Okay.
or what
What
the
the goal
question
is?
we want to answer by the end of this is?
Yeah, what
And
the
I don't
aim
want to do that
is.
because I'm not sure if I know. I can
Also,
do that.
everyone try and project their voices. I think.
Oh,
'cause
yeah.
I don't know
Oh,
how
yeah.
good it is at picking it up.
Wait a second, what group we
Right, so what are the most important elements of a successful creative practice?
Cool.
Coolio.
I think our first sort of topic was about like whether what do we consider to be good art, and is what is successful art.
Yeah, does art, because some art I would consider is good, but maybe not successful, but then some really successful, maybe like commercially successful art isn't necessarily quote unquote good.
But I guess like what makes good art? Like that's also a question. Like, is it technically good, or is it? Does it have to be technical ability, or is it concepts, or
Yeah, that's true.
you know?
But then, like with if it's successful, surely then that insinuates that the art has to have a purpose.
Mm.
And a lot of art now isn't created like for briefs or for commercial purposes. It's just created. So you have to look at like the wider context and what's happening, what it addresses potentially in the art, either obviously or like subconsciously to other people. If that is successful, rather than like, does it make you want to buy something or like do something?
Should I be writing this stuff
What
on
about
the
notoriety and stuff? Like, because I was thinking about like what we were talking about yesterday, about the urinal, the fountain by
Duchamp.
Marcel Duchamp.
Yeah.
Mm.
And like,
The product, like, did you read up about it? It was like ready made.
yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
So like, is that art? I mean, it is, because like, but like, it's like a very famous piece and it's been in galleries and things. But like, was a lot of, you know, artistic skill put into it? No. But does that mean that it's not art? Like,
Does
Well,
it deserve
yeah.
that fame?
yeah.
Because like, is the concept the art, or is his like name what makes the art? Is his name a brand?
Yeah.
That's also a
Yeah.
question. Like Damien Hirst, I think his name's a brand.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Because his art isn't made by him, which is quite interesting. And does the art have to be made by the artist? It's just the concept that's made by him.
Yeah, but because I suppose you could say things like fashion, for example, is an art form, and like someone can, who's the actual artist, the designer, or who makes the actual clothing item?
That's true.
Because like a dress, for example, like a haute couture dress, can have like hundreds of people working on it. Is that a collaborative effort, or is it the singular person who just designed?
And also the designer gets the credit, like the artist will get
Yeah.
the credit,
Yeah.
which isn't that fair.
I also feel though that like nowadays, because like everything has been done before, having an original idea is more important than being able to have the skill to create something.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like the reason why contemporary art tends to be seen as like so abstract is because everyone's just trying to do something that no one's ever thought
Yeah,
of.
I think everyone's kind of trying to outdo each other in sort of this outlandish way, and like, but also you could say that the traditional methods of art aren't as popular as they used to be, and lots of people who are artists don't have, like we were saying yesterday, don't have like a formal traditional art education, and do you in order to be considered an artist, like historically to be an artist you had to be able to draw, like you were saying yesterday about life drawing and things, and you had to be able to paint and kind of do everything, but then specialise in something, but it had to be like that kind of traditional thing of sculpture, drawing, painting. Do you have to have a background in that to be considered an artist?
I really like the fact that like you probably don't have to have a background in that anymore though, because I feel like for so long, and still kind of is, the art world is really like snobby and exclusive.
It's so elitist.
And like the amount of people who are like, oh, I'm not creative because I can't draw, and I'm like, okay, what's drawing got to do with anything? Like,
That's very true.
But also I think like improving your technique is kind of like it allows you to like, if you have an idea in your head, like improving your technique gives you like the way of communicating that onto paper or onto sculpture, like what's in your head exactly will come out like as you improve your technique. So I do think like it kind of does have a purpose, but like it's not integral. Like you don't have to have technique, but it can help you, I think.
Yeah, I think it was quite interesting what you saying about the art world being like snobby or elitist. It's kind of, there's a sense of irony in that, because I think so often art has been a social commentary and will comment on social issues, especially things of like injustice and things. But often the people who are commenting on it will experience that, but then their work isn't as revered as the people who are actually benefiting from the system, who are like, you know, normally historically have been, you know, white, upper class individuals, who like are the famous, you know, artists. But like the actual art that like we consider as art, you have to have meaning behind it. But then historically, like I don't know if that makes sense.
Isn't one of our other questions, does that need to have meaning?
Yes, it was. Yes, does that have to have meaning? That's a question.
I don't feel like it does. I feel like it's so incredibly annoying when you just want to make something for the sake of making something.
And everyone's like, oh, what the underlying like issues this addresses.
It's literally not, it's just an orange.
Literally, yeah.
Like,
But I think
It's not
everything
that
kind of like does have meaning, even if the meaning is like not particularly like profound. Like all art, like everything you do inherently has a meaning. Like the meaning could just be like to look nice, or but like that is a meaning in itself, even if it's not like profound or like social commentary or something. It's
Yeah, it's true. Like,
But often the
write something on paper,
Just
maybe.
want to write,
Yeah.
start writing.
Jake's brought his Sharpie, so it's very
Maybe
eager.
that's right. So,
He's been like waiting for this.
Just
now.
like, just
Should we write the main question and
Write
then like
words.
all our subcategories?
Yeah, if someone wants to like keep track.
I
yeah, we've got the main
what
one before.
was it? Oh yeah, I think that like you said, all art has meaning, but it might not be intentional meaning. So like, is meaning exclusive to what the artist wants it to mean, or what other people read it into it?
yeah, because
Like, is that as valid as?
because I was saying about, I suggested about, is art subjective,
Yeah.
and like can it have multiple meanings to different people, or is it like, is the artist, what is the artist's intention, the true intention, like the true like meaning of the artwork, or is it down to the individual who interprets it? Because like you said, the artist could draw an orange and the intention is literally they wanted to paint an orange.
And does that change its value? I think that's quite an important thing. Like, because if it is meant to be subjective, does that change the value of the art if the artist didn't like mean for that interpretation kind of thing?
I think it's nice though, like, because some artwork you like want it to be relatable,
Yeah.
and I did like a whole project like last year on Foundation, which was all like about like self-acceptance and all that kind of thing. And someone looked at it and there was like, oh, like I felt like I could relate to it because of this, and the whole big point of like the project was that it was to be relatable. And although like it wasn't relatable in the sense that I was trying to get it across at, it was still nice that they found something that they felt like they related to in it.
Yeah, like it's just nice.
Yeah.
Nice for the artist. Yeah.
So I don't feel like it necessarily like matters.
Well, I think maybe you can't just judge art, every piece of art in the art history in nowadays, because different ages have their successful different meaning. So
Yeah.
maybe nowadays, maybe a successful art means you do what you want to do, maybe not depends on your drawing skills or something else, but maybe in the ancient time, their purpose to show their social issues, that would be a successful art.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
different.
And also, sorry.
I was saying, I suppose with photography, because like the original reason for painting, especially like European oil paintings, wasn't, you know, to depict, like to comment on like sort of social issues particularly. It was originally to
Create like a
create
photo,
a
like,
photograph, like a
Photorealism.
moment in time.
yeah, like how so like in the EVC we addressed it. It was like people bought paintings of things that they couldn't necessarily afford to own. So like that's why still lifes and everything was such a big thing, because having the painting, because it was so realistic and everything, was worth the same as having that object. Whereas now, like, you don't get a lot of hyper-realistic still life paintings or anything, just because
There's no need for it.
there's no need for it. Like everything is material. Like the whole economy has changed, and now it's more like people own art as a currency rather than as an object.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting because like NFTs, I think I brought this up yesterday, but like they are worth so much and it's literally a currency now, which is kind of crazy.
I think that kind of goes back to the whole like an artist is a brand, like an NFT to like of like a not particularly popular artist is not worth, like of the same thing would not be worth anything close to like, you know, Damien Hirst did like NFTs and they were worth a lot of money, like straight out the bat, just because
of his name. Yeah.
But I suppose like there's a whole thing also about what is art anyway. Like, can you consider everything to be art? Like even just like the acts of like day-to-day life, like me drinking my coffee, is that like, there's some people who argue that like, kind of when you, I suppose in a way, romanticize your life or whatever, that everything you do is an art form because there's a way to do it and it's you expressing yourself in a certain way. Or
Yeah, like controversially, is this art? Like, would you guys consider this art?
I think because like we have a knowledge of art, and because we like not have grown up with it or whatever, but because we've been exposed to it and everything and the different sides of it, I'd say it's art. But like if you went to pluck someone out from like the street or something who haven't taken art, like haven't had any kind of art education or anything, they'd be like, you're just having a conversation.
Yeah, they almost
But
feel
it's
like
about
taking the
to-
piss
Exactly.
of it, but it's
See, I have like a proper view of it. I probably believe that every little thing like could be considered art if I say so, because I consider myself an artist and I say it is.
Yeah.
Like, I think like anyone who does like any sort of creative thinking or practice enough to consider themselves as an artist, they can turn anything they want into art.
Yeah, that's so true. Because like I think anything creative, as you're saying, like I think literature is art. I think also, you know, people who like scientists sometimes, or people who are like into discovering things or inventing things, even though that's not typically considered art. Like I think especially science and art are very normally considered like polar opposites, but actually there's an intricacy that is like they're linked. And even like, things like surgeons, like what they're doing is so precise and there's a method to it. It's kind of like traditional art forms
Or cosmetic surgery is definitely an art form. Like they construct, like for example, like a rhinoplasty, like they construct a nose, like that's from their imagination. That's definitely sculpting something, and which is an art form, which is quite interesting.
like food.
Mutilation.
And like
When you put it that way.
chefs, like chefs and bakers and stuff, like confectionery thing, people who are doing that, that's an art form.
In John Berger's book, he said that the notion that art is separate from crafts and sort of professions is based on the art history institution's attempts to sort of elevate art into something that can be sort of contrived, and like where it can become sort of more like a sort of little elite sort of thing. So I think the notion that a plastic surgeon or like a doctor or a carpenter isn't an artist is quite modern. So I think we can still regard that as art anyway.
Goes back to that sort of elitism thing.
That
Like,
question,
the people, you know, they were trying to differentiate themselves from like someone back in the day, like being a carpenter or a blacksmith. That was a craft. But then what's the difference between that, which takes a lot of skill, and painting and oil painting, which also takes a lot of skill, and they're both, you know, the aim is to create a product at the end of it, and both take a level of creativity.
And with that, like, it's kind of like, yeah, an artist or a creative or someone, anything they do is art, but because of like all the stereotypes and everything surrounding what art is and like fine art and everything, artists can recognise that like someone making their bed is art, but to everyone else it's just someone making their bed. And because there's so many artists, it's easy to like forget that well, there's so many people who would consider themselves artists, it's so easy to forget that like there's other people in the world who just have no idea what anyone's talking about. Like the people, like I come into contact with so many people and they just don't understand like how something could be considered art.
That's the thing, like do you need an art education
That's
to
something that
understand
brings back
art?
to that.
Like somebody who's like hasn't been educated in anything, would they look at a famous art piece from the Renaissance and like understand it, or do you need to be explained it?
Or like,
But then is it an emotional connection? I don't know.
yeah, or like the fact that you're saying what is considered art and things like that, do you have to have a formal art education to understand that? Like the fact that we're talking about this, we wouldn't be talking about this if we didn't have an art education, but equally there's artists who have no art education who still are creatives. They create, like when you're a kid, you know, you draw and do like little colouring ins and stuff. That is like a creative outlet, but you didn't talk about what is art, or you didn't look at when your mum told you to make your bed, you weren't like, oh, this is an art form.
I think you don't. Sorry.
No, go on.
I think you don't have to have an art education. I think it helps, but I think like anybody can connect with like, you know, a piece on some level, whether that be aesthetically, whether they see something that they're like, oh, that kind of relates to that in some way, like what you were saying about the self-acceptance, like it was your work, but people relate to it. I think it helps because like we were saying, like we can sit here and talk about this now on a different level to what we could like even last year or the year before, because we've come a bit further. Like, so I don't think it's essential. I just think it helps get it to like a different level.
I think it can also like hinder it, because obviously now we're all in like a post-18 art education setting, and it is very different to an art education you have at school. Like if I was to tell someone that I did art GCSE with about what I'm doing now, they'd be like, you're not doing art anymore, what is that? Because it limits it so much to like learning techniques, learning like historical things, learning like what makes like a good painting and everything, because that's how like you're taught in like school or college or whatever, as opposed to like this, which is more like conceptual and like thinking.
But is art still elite, arguably, because we are in a very privileged country and we are learning about art, but like a lot of people can't really afford to go down a route of art education because it doesn't guarantee a lot of things. Like traditionally didn't guarantee like a good job, I guess, or a secure income, stable income. So like this, is it still elitist?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think? Yeah.
I feel like as well though, like it also like depends on like natural personal interest. Like, cause like you might not like go to like an elite art school or whatever, but you might be like heavily interested in art, and there's nothing from stopping anyone
But I
from
think
looking at that in their own time. At the
oh
same
yeah,
time.
looking at it, but I think pursuing it is another thing. I think being able to pursue art is
Privilege.
it's like you have to be really privileged to be able to pursue it, and especially if it's your soul, like the only thing you're doing. Like if, because that's why so many artists work like, you know, multiple jobs, because they can't live off just being an artist. Because even though I've always think about this, it's like our culture, everything we sort of think about, or everything that the kind of hobbies or people who we idolise and stuff, are artists, like musicians or like, you know, traditional artists or actors or whatever. And yet those, like I think because it can be so oversaturated that the majority of people in those careers are barely scraping by, and yet you have such a divide with that you have like, you know, musicians who is multi-platinum who are making millions and millions.
I feel like the same in like a lot of like creative industries like this, like fine art, and then also like the music industry. You rather like make pennies or you like make freaking millions.
Exactly.
Like
it's controlled by like
something like teaching, there's a pretty, obviously there's disparity and stuff, but it's pretty, you know.
But I think that's because it benefits like collectors and things like that, because like the average person, like the average consumer, doesn't really like, we don't really spend money on the art industry. Like the main contributors are like collectors and like big money people, so it benefits them to have like high up artists, you know.
argue we don't. I think when it's the original sort of thing, then yeah, but like we all consume art, and I think, well, obviously we all consume art, but we also, I think, pay to consume art. Like if we're buying albums or something, or you know, even buying our prints and stuff, like we can afford a print, we can't afford maybe like an original Damien Hirst or whatever, but you can get a print of a famous artist's work.
But I think arguably, sorry, I was just going to say, like, people don't actually buy prints that much, or albums, in fact. Like, it's all digitalised, so people don't. And even, like, galleries are free. Like, most galleries are free. So people don't even really
like,
pay
the
for
collectors
art.
are the ones that put the art in the galleries. So they're the ones that determine what art you see realistically.
And that is, like, that relates back to the elitism, because it's the uber wealthy who put that in there or buy that, which is interesting.
I think some misunderstanding of like the people about art, because what you just said is people didn't pay for art. That's, I think, the same situation in my country, in China, but not in art, in the sports things, because in Europe people pay to watch the football games or other sports because it's their life, the part of their life, so they think they want to pay to. But in China we didn't do the same thing, because we don't think sport is that important in our life, and we don't have to pay because we don't live with it. So I think for arts maybe the same in all over the world, because people think this too far away from them, and they don't know what art means. So that's what some people did in the ancient time, famous, because they want to present their ideas in quite deep and hard way, so people can't get it. So that's the misunderstanding of art.
Yes. Yeah. So it's like people take it for granted. Like we kind of expect it to be available to us.
Yeah, I think that was one of the points. One of the questions was like, is it a right to be allowed to see art? Because it is our history and our culture. Like, do we have a right for it to be free, or should we pay for it? That was one of the next questions.
I think it should be. I think it is alright. I think it should be free.
I think as well.
Yeah, because like growing up, like I kind of got into art through like my brother did art GCSE, so I'd like watch him kind of draw, and I'd kind of like try and copy it, or like I'd read. We didn't have access to like galleries and trips away to see all these like wonderful paintings that when you come to art college is sometimes considered what you have to have had experience with to be a valued art student. We didn't have that, so like I used to like read his artist research and be like, oh, that's cool, and so I think it should be, because why, like, you know, if you go back to like being little, why now as an art student should I have had any, like, I'm not saying I didn't have a right to it, it was like, but why should someone have less of a right to that or less access to that if circumstance can help it than someone else?
So the way I got into art was literally like children's books, like the little illustrations, and like I look at that and then I'd like try and copy it or whatever. And yeah, I suppose that's another question, like, is imitation, can that be considered? Because I was reading this article about how there's no individuality, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And about how art is actually nowadays is about, you know, taking concepts that other people already have done, but working on it and improving them, rather than coming up with something completely brand new. Because nothing is individual. I mean, this was what the journalist was arguing, and it was a really interesting point, actually.
I don't think that's a new issue particularly, because all the like Renaissance paintings were based on this
and like there was no individuality like when art started out. It was all about like, did you have the skill to produce something to this level? And because all like the success of painters.
I suppose it's also about like Western art as well.
Yeah, you know about like it was all based on being able to produce something that lived up to like a standard, and because of that standard, everything looked the same.
Yeah, that's true.
I wrote down a Pablo Picasso quote, which was, "Good artists copy, great artists steal." So that's kind of
I think back to like, should we have access? Like, do we have a right to have access to all art and things? I think also, I think art's such a important way to also learn about other cultures and stuff, because maybe we have to remember that there's not just like sort of traditional like European art of like, you know, oil painting or whatever, like that's where European art kind of had its basis. Like there's so many sort of like traditional like African art and, you know, all over the world, and every culture has its own art forms. And even like, as you were saying earlier about what is art, like food and stuff, I'd argue is kind of, yeah, an art form, even though it can be something really basic.
I feel like, linking back again to like our earlier points, kind of like the difference between like fine art and kind of like something like craftsmanship, or like, you know, like a carpentry or like whatever like it was that we were talking about. I feel like you've got to have like a bit more of like an imagination to like have like an actual idea instead of just having like the skills to create a nice looking product. I mean, like, I suppose if we're getting down to the nitty gritty of it, although like I as a creative I feel like I can consider anything I do as art if I like want it to be art. It's also got to have a bit of like it's got to have like some sort of idea behind it, like maybe not like a meaning, but it's got to have had like, you know, like you're kind of making it because you're being creative, not because you want it to have like a function, if that makes sense.
And some art is functionable, so it's just like, it's so confusing.
Yeah, that's so true.
I think in terms of the, like, we're just discussing where we have a right to art, where does anyone think like contemporary art like stands? Like, do we have a right to artists that are like working today, like, because their way of making money is, you know, selling prints or selling their work? Like, do we have just the right to access everyone's art all the time, or is it just like the old art, it's like art history, like art history?
I feel like we do have like a right to access to contemporary art, especially because that's like kind of what inspires people the most. Like people, working artists who are alive, doing their thing, still producing work. But obviously I don't think we have a right, as in that it should be free, because people need to make money, like people need to have a living. So like I do believe like an open studio where you could like donate or like pay, I don't know, I think we do have a right to contemporary art.
I think we have a right through, because as technology's like progressed so much, especially in like the last few decades, that, you know, most people can access, you know, art. I can click of a button. But then again, like Izzy or someone was, I can't remember who it was, someone was saying the other day about how is that actually, you know, experiencing the art, because you're experiencing the image of the art. Just kind of what, like, I think John Berger was saying about, is it actually, do you have to see the piece of art? If we're talking about like traditional fine art, does it have to be in the flesh, or can it be through a secondary source?
I also think like in terms of like someone has to pay for the art, like, and like if an artist, they need to make money, someone needs to be paying for it. And in the art world, the big people, what are the ones with the money, and therefore they do have control over, like, if they're the ones paying the bills, so they're the ones like that have control over what art we see. So although we might have access, it's kind of only access that someone has given you. Like, it's not completely unlimited because someone has to pay for it.
I feel like you could get, as like an artist, though, a point where you'd get so big that like you could just kind of do what you want. Cause like
Damien Hirst, I know.
yeah, like once you've like built a name for yourself,
A brand again.
yeah, like that. I swear that's like another
Like
question on our paper.
Literally
like,
anything that anyone produces, if you have like a big name and you're
Yeah.
known, even if you're not positively
Like
known,
Banksy.
people will like buy into it and everything just so they can be like,
Imagine
oh
if-
yeah, I own like
Banksy
Banksy.
has
Like-
yeah, it's like,
yeah.
I mean,
Not-
Banksy's such a
yeah,
good example. We don't know who the hell they
He
are.
but
That's mental, isn't it? Nobody knows, sorry. Side
his name's not even Banksy.
Well, like, is it, but even with Banksy, is it like a, like almost, because we don't know, it could be like it could be multiple people for all we know.
Yeah.
It could be someone, the
Could be a whole, like,
original Banksy
underground
could have
collective or
died,
whatever.
and someone carried on or imitated the style, and we still think,
It could be a child.
As well though, like that kind of like makes me think like they're not like artists, but thinking of like celebrities. Does anyone
They
like
are
remember
artists,
when like
that's more.
Kim Kardashian's child Northwest painted that little
Oh,
scenery
yeah.
of painting, and everyone went like batshit crazy about it because it was actually like good for like the age she was at. Imagine if that got freaking put up on like an auction or something. I bet someone would pay like
Oh, that'd be decent.
a lot of freaking money just so they could be like,
More money than sense.
yeah.
Like, someone would definitely buy that.
And like that's a child, like they've already like got a name for themselves.
But then they have a name for themselves because their parents
yeah.
are incredible. And the reason I'm not saying, you know, the girl has no talent or whatever, but probably they had I remember her saying that they had like a masterclass type thing.
Yeah.
So it was taught like step by step or whatever. And like they had access to that. Like your average kid on like a council estate is not going to have a
Yeah.
bloody
And
masterclass.
they've had a bit of a step up as well,
And
given like
Let's say they did.
our mum's Kim
Let's say-
Kardashian, like
Yeah.
she had a bit of a step up to get a name for herself.
And let's say like they did, like let's say it's just some like random rich kid, but like no one actually knows who they are, and they take the same masterclass. It would still like it would not be worth like anywhere near as much because like who are they? They're a nobody to everyone else.
Yeah. That's the thing. I think. Yeah, like name and branding in creative industries is so important. Like especially, yeah. I mean, if you think about like people get names for themselves as artists. Like if you look at, I mean, most musicians will have like a stage presence, whatever. That could be completely different. The persona can be completely different to who they actually are, but it's like a branding. Or like what's her name? Like Tracy Emin in like the 90s. She had her name as like the what was it? The something tale of art in England, but in Britain, or something like the, I can't remember, it's like the Rebel or something, like because she would go on talk shows to talk about her art, and she'd turn up completely like shit-faced, completely wasted.
It's like Sia, isn't it?
Yeah.
No,
and-
like a very small amount of people actually know who Sia is.
because everyone, the artist, like in order to be, because as I said, we were saying art has been so like reproduced, and just every art kind of, you can kind of link it into another because it's so similar in one way or another, that the only way artists can become successful, arguably, is through a persona.
It would be interesting. Like, I'm not saying it does. I haven't really thought about an opinion on it. It would just be like interesting to consider. Is it their? I don't know if we've already said this. Is it like the enigma, or like their actual art?
Yeah, like Banksy.
Like,
is it
because
like
they
the
become-
mystery of who it is,
Yeah, like you think of
or is
Sia,
it
and you
actually
think
his work?
the
Yeah.
chandelier and the massive wig.
Yeah.
Like you don't. Do you know what I mean? You don't think of one without the other. So at this point, she is like massive wig and song. So it's like, it would be interesting. I'm not saying either side on it, like I said, but it would be interesting to like consider if, taking her for example, would it be as successful without the, like, I don't really know how
I
to
think-
stand on that one.
Yeah, is it like the artists themselves and what they look like rather than the actual art? Like, because some people you can just have a tiny little aspect of maybe what they look like, or how they speak, or how they present themselves, and you just have that, or like maybe a word or like a drawing of something, and you can be like, that's.
It's
know,
like
that's
you
that
want
person.
what you can't have.
If you see
Like
like,
you can't
a
have
huge,
full access to
if you
them.
literally saw a drawing of like a huge beehive thing with a rose in it or something, you go Amy Winehouse. But like you could know that without knowing their art, or her art, or whatever, or like not Picasso, sorry, oh God, that's like absolute, Van Gogh or whatever. He wasn't even known. He wasn't successful in his life. He was only successful after his life. But like you see a, but like you see a certain aspect of him, and you'll be like, that's Van Gogh. Even if you don't like his work, you know that's him.
Do we think that this sort of mystification of the artist
That's
and
the
sort of making them
word.
an enigma is a way of coping with the fact that the reality is they're only famous and their art is only in galleries because they've kind of climbed the ladder a bit and been sort of given that by the industry? Like, do we think that, like,
That's right.
we sort of make a story to make the art worth something when in reality it's just another person?
That's what I wrote my A-level fine art like essay on, was about. It was about artists and like mental health and stuff, but then how the consumer completely mystifies artists and can sometimes put them on pedestals or do the opposite to suit their sort of thing. I sort of wrote about obviously it's music, but I think it kind of links it. I think all creators link in and find out. I was talking about like the 27 Club.
But we definitely do that with artists, like music artists, or even like film directors like Quentin Tarantino. Like we put everybody on a bit of a pedestal just to make their art seem like it's worth more, maybe.
And like completely mystifying and romanticising things that aren't really.
Definitely. And even someone like Gordon Ramsay, it's always just like an ego thing, and like they seem better than us because they have a better, like they know more, like their networking is crazy and they're like more popular, but in like the, I don't know, in the artist world.
It's like maybe it's because we can't like access it, so we're kind of a bit like, whoa, but when you boil it down, like I like the guy, but Gordon Ramsay can be a complete nut and knobhead.
Yeah.
Like when you actually boil it down.
Food any better than
he can be an absolute knob.
Honestly, I don't think with, like, especially nowadays, but also I think in the past, but particularly with media the way it is today, that it's not actually about the product, it's about the person.
Yeah.
And because I was reading an article about media and politicians and how politicians nowadays use the media so much, and actually it's more about the charisma of the politician rather than their policies. I think it's the same way you can look at it with an artist. It's not the product thing. Because I think there was a study, it was really shocking, like people should not be able to vote in this country. It was like I can't remember the percentage or something, but like a decent percentage of people said that they would vote for someone over their personality, over their actual policies.
Well,
like even if their policies were against what they actually believe in, but their charisma, and like I think you can look at especially cases like Donald Trump and Boris Johnson, that they have made this image around themselves that they become a celebrity and they considered charismatic or relatable or whatever.
It's
people
sorry. It's like Boris Johnson's like best example I can give. Don't support this at all. I don't. But like my auntie loves Boris Johnson, and I'm like, you do realise where we are from? It's crippled. Like where we live is crippled by his government and his ideologies. And she's like, he's so funny. And I was like, no, Claire, he's not.
Well, yeah,
like it's this
like,
little thing that people want you to think he is, to hide. Like, not to like, well, actually to Boris Bash, but like, for that example of kind of like...
But it's true, like my mum said a saying, it was like, Boris Johnson is known as like a fox dressed up as a teddy bear or something, which is so interesting.
He's like a lovable clown.
He deliberately changes. His name is Alexander.
Is he?
Yeah, but he calls himself Boris because it makes him seem like down to earth and like relatable.
His actual name is Alexander. Boris is his middle name.
Oh,
so this is back to the idea of like, you like idolise people, and then it's like,
and he does things like
wait, look at when his helmet on Wonky
and like thing.
Don't you also think that like
Union Jacks?
he's kind of like one of the few kind of like MPs as well who kind of like, he doesn't like formally get called obviously, but like kind of has like a nickname like Bojo.
Yeah,
exactly. Like, you know what I mean? It makes him seem like
evil.
He's actually
he's
actually like a media genius. Like I hate the man, but the way he has created his image is so he went. That's why he went to Eton.
Yeah.
He went to Oxford. He is highly
I've seen a
educated.
photo of him at Eton.
That is not. Yeah.
It's gonna
That's not the kind of person who you would think of as being highly educated.
How did
But
we
then,
get
So highly educated.
because remember when
But politics
like,
is
going back
linked
to
to
art.
art, though. I think.
Yeah, going back to art. Remember when they were like retrain, creative people retrain.
Yeah.
Oh
With
my
the
god,
ballerina?
that was
Oh,
ridiculous.
that was-
Those
that was hella
adverts,
laugh.
like
I was like, who designed your poster then? Who actually designed your
it was
poster?
like this ballerina could be like a high tech whatever, but like she started doing ballet. Like what?
She just doesn't know it yet.
She just doesn't know. Yeah.
Because the
What?
thing is, I think
I could actually be like a mathematical genius.
Yeah.
Like, I think also some people in the creative industry, like unless you're literally like really, you're not appreciated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was those whole posters. It was like Martha is currently a painter, but she could be a barista, but she doesn't know it yet.
But also they're cutting funding for like
Yeah.
art things. Like they won't supply for art schools, and also like art foundations are like one of the last free government funded things. And that's probably gonna be extinct in like a couple years. Like,
I think what, like, kind of relating it back to art is the idea of like, if none of this was a thing, then like, what would they watch on a night? What would they hang on their walls?
I think
What would they sit on?
Yeah.
Because, like, you know, talking about craftsmanship and stuff.
What they watch on TV.
What would they sit on?
and they seem
What
to
would
be
they watch on
more
TV? What would
cultural
they
if
read?
they go to galleries. Like,
Yeah.
oh, you're so cultural.
So
you're
it's
so
like,
educated,
it's alright
but-
to piss on it
Yeah.
when you think it's alright to piss on it, but then you go to a gallery and stand and bumble on about how meaningful it is on a Saturday afternoon for something to do.
I think
Yeah.
it's so
pick a
ironic
side,
that
you
often
know?
the people consuming the art, like the mega rich,
Look down on it.
who tend to have, I mean, like if you're talking in broad stereotypical sense,
Yeah.
tend to be more right-wing conservative traditionally. They're the people who are consuming the art, and the artists, particularly those who are not haven't had much success, but you know they can still be in the gallery, can still sell things, tend to be, especially nowadays, is lots of art is commenting on social injustice or issues, or even if it's not that mundane things, that they tend to have a certain set of ideals that are the complete opposite of the people who are paying to own this art as a status symbol.
Yeah. It's like puppets dancing.
Yeah.
Like, it's a bit like it feels a bit like, when we talk about it, a bit like court jestery. You know, that kind of like, make your nice pretty work, and I will look and go, yeah, that's really nice, I want to hang it on my wall. But then when you actually want to do it as a job, I'm going to be like, no.
This is another thing about the big question, like what events make an artist successful or something. Well, like, do you have to be in a gallery, have to have exhibited something or shown something to a large audience to be considered a successful artist? Because I think that
I think it
kind
depends on what we
of
define success.
Success, yeah, exactly.
Because someone
Yeah.
considers themselves successful because they're happy and they are like, all their needs are provided for, you know, like you can eat and things like that, and you're happy, you can consider that successful, but someone else could consider successful to be like uber rich and
Yeah, you
like,
have to be
everyone
the
knows.
CEO.
also in a
Yeah.
capitalistic like society, I don't think a lot of people think like, oh, I'm content, I'm happy, so I'm successful. A lot of people, majority, think success is wealth, which is kind of
I think
crazy.
we have that
You can be like,
mindset. More.
yeah, onto people
nothing's
who
good
like don't understand or don't have any art education or any concept of an art education or what art is. It's like, we could say it's success that we got onto this course at this university doing fine art, but then when you talk to someone else and you're like, oh yeah, I studied fine art, then everyone's like, that's not a real degree.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it's crazy. Even though you've worked so hard to like
Yeah.
get here.
Probably so much like,
it really annoys me when like they're like, oh, so like, what is fine art and like drawing
Yeah.
and shit.
Everything.
That's such like,
Everything.
yeah, they're like, so do you like just draw? And I'm like, no.
Or they say like, oh, that's so fun, and it's your degree. Yes, it is fun, but like
It's
it's so
also-
patronising to
yeah.
say that my degree is just fun.
Yeah.
Do you know
Yeah.
what I feel like differentiates like our degree compared to others though?
Mm.
I feel like we actually give a shit about our degree on like a different level to someone who like
more of a passion
studies
as well.
maths.
We had this in our flat
Like-
last night. I'm sitting there like absolute like, oh my god, I've got this discussion tomorrow, I can't think of an answer for this. And all of this, and my flatmate was like, I had an essay due today, didn't do it. And she's like, just don't go, it's fine. And I was like, I can't not go.
Yeah.
And she was like,
Literally.
why can't you not go? And I was like, because I can't not go to create a process, and we've had this discussion and we planned it out. And I've got a bit and all this, and she was like, and Ali was like,
It's like a
I'm going
commitment.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well,
And
none of
it-
us had to be here today. Like we all chose to be here.
Yeah.
It was
That's so
described,
true.
we literally didn't have to. But
Like, I'm sorry, but like, I just refuse to believe that anyone's like passionate about flipping psychology or like law in the same way that like we're passionate about fine art, and like that's
and then
because you're not just like
I
It's
think-
so much commitment
I think
to it.
people
Yeah.
trivialise it because it can be considered a hobby to some. Like no one says,
yeah.
oh, engineering is my hobby, or like, you know,
Yeah.
biochem is my hobby. But people can be like, oh yeah, I study engineering, but in my spare time I paint. And then so people trivialise it and they're like, oh, you do a little painting, or
But it's like when I said I was going to art college, certain members of my family were like, why don't you know, do something more practical? Why don't you do like hair and beauty, and then you'll always have a job and do that on the side?
Or they would
and I was
say,
like,
like,
can you
literally.
do it
Oh,
on
you
the
have-
side?
oh, you
I
go,
have-
oh, are you
I
going
have
into
family members
teaching
go, but you
then?
have so much potential. You have so much potential. Like you could go into this. You could go into that. Like you have, like you can do it. Why don't you do it? Why are you wasting it on art when you know you're not stupid? You can go into something else. And I'm like,
and then talking about success, surely like if we choose to pursue something which doesn't guarantee like a high paying job or something, and there's that element of risk or whatever, surely that's like
passion shows you true love it.
Like it leads to like internal, maybe this just doesn't make sense, but like internal success or whatever, because like we don't feel like we're like
you need to be driven to do this,
to do something.
But then you could argue that comes from a place of privilege, like we're
I'm gonna say like
are able to take that risk.
Because I kind of thought then, like, maybe that differentiates, like, us from people who say, oh, I chose to go into graphics because, you know, more job security. Like, does that mean that we're, like, more passionate about it? But then as well, like, that's definitely a place of privilege, because if that's something that you have to really consider.
I don't know, because I feel a bit torn on it, because I am doing this degree non fine, well it might go down the drain and I might not get a really employable job, and then I want to have no money, but I kind of like, I don't know, I feel really torn on it, because I'm like going to train on the side to be a tattooist and like sitting doing the designs and stuff, and I'm working on that because that's what I want to do, like post grad. But it's really hard, because even though I don't necessarily, like, I'm very privileged to be here, but don't necessarily have the privilege of like a safety blanket if things go wrong, sort of thing. But I'm still doing it, so I feel a bit torn. But I don't know if that's, to be honest, just because I'm fucking stubborn and I was like, I'm going anywhere.
But then at the same time, like, that as well is different, because your like main stable career, you literally just worded it, and then like you're viewing that as the thing that you're doing on the side. You're not doing art on the side. You're training to be a tattoo artist on the side, whereas usually like for a lot of people it's the other way around. They're like, oh yeah, I'm a tattoo artist, but I paint for fun, or like, you know, I do small local exhibitions in my spare time. It's not like that's the, like, this fine art bit is like the main bit, and you're seeing like the job as like the little bit you're doing as the side.
Okay.
Maybe we should have.
Do we end it there? Do we do a little sum up?
Should we see if we can like not
do the
potentially answer the question, but like should we like go back to the question?
Yeah, let's go back. So let's state.
We go round and like each of us can just sum up their little answer.
Yeah.
Like in just like a sentence or two.
Okay, so someone will read out the question.
Yeah. What are the most important elements of a successful creative practice?
We really went off piece.
But I think you can link everything back to
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's the question?
So what are the most important elements of a successful creative practice?
Passion.
Yeah.
I think passion.
what's the word, and it's like, it's not fearlessness, but it's like
Resilience.
no. It's like having the confidence. It's like there's a word for like being risk-takeable, just like having the confidence or
the oh my god, the
there's a word. Oh well.
I think you need a willingness to like swim against the current as well, like, and be really driven if you go into art. And
there's
like
a
to be a
reason why so
successful
many
artist.
artists are kind of like from alternative subcultures.
I think you just got to kind of like take whatever it throws at you and just be like, alright, okay, I'll sort it.
I think a lot of art is like willingness to be open to like ideas and like kind of understanding like your opinions of things are like a combination of like all of your experiences.
Like I think one of the elements is like not like self-reflection, but acknowledging your place in it.
It's like an awareness of self.
Yeah, self-awareness. Yeah.
I mean, I did a lot of listening, but I mean, in terms of like successful, I mean, that can be a different thing. But I think for it to be successful in some way, whatever way that is, you just got to like care about what you're doing.
Yeah.
So as long as you care, it'll be successful in some sort of way.
passion.
Just want to read something maybe not related, but just don't be misled or limited by the existing ideologies. Like what we said, this is a good thing or the bad things, because some famous artists try to jump out the general canonized, so they create their own styles to lead their ages. So.
Yeah, and what's bad art to one person is a great art. Like one man's trash is another man's treasure.
Yeah, that's
type of thing.
that's kind of what I.
Like it is so subjective.
Yeah, like that's what I was like meaning, like right at the beginning, like when I think like anything can be considered as art, and like anything can be like good art because it's so like it is so conceptual. You can have like your opinion on like what you prefer, but you can't really like say like as a fact like this is bad art or like this is what good art looks like.
Which I think why is also another reason people struggle to understand why people do art as like an academic thing, because it is subjective. Like, you know, with maths the answer is right or wrong, but with art there is no right or wrong. As I know that's cringe and cliche, but it is true.
I think strength and bravery,
Yeah.
because I think that like sums up a lot of the things that people who want to be successful / are successful have to face, and you have to have that like you have to have some kind of confidence in yourself, because if you think it's successful, then
Resilient.
that's perfectly valid. It doesn't have to be seen as successful by everyone else.
I think kind of linked to that like kind of stubbornness, like
Stubborn resilience.
yeah, kind of like, well, I want to do it, so I'm going to do it, and I don't really care. Like I'm going to make it whether you like it or not.
Yeah,
I think that's
belief
important.
in yourself, I think.
Oh yeah.
Self-belief.
Cool, I mean.
Do we wrap it up there?
Nice.